Tell us more about what you're calling an in and out action, why you would do that, how you did it, how often that happened.
Okay. Those I like those a lot. They seem to be a lot of original thinking ideas on those in and out actions. People had different ways of doing them, and I did. I participated in several of them, but I was often the support person, not the person going in and out. And so it just depended on, what thing. When I say a lot of them, I'm not going to say I did one a night or something like that, but over a summer, maybe 3 or 4, which is, putting your life in the hands of the patriarchy like that is a lot if you do that many. Some people did a lot more. I mean, they in and out actions were kind of what was this, that description was, you'd go in, do something, and come out without being arrested, that was opposed to civil disobedience, where you went in, got arrested, got a ban and bar letter, or whatever they're going to do with you. And so you were, it was 2 different ways of being. If you went in and they found you doing something and they arrested you, that was a whole different ball game from when you were doing civil disobedience. In that regard, you may or may not get legal help from the camp, depending on what was going on. I mean, you'd hope that you would, but it just depended on, a lot of times, on who was doing it and what they were doing. And some people knew that there was going to be an in-and-out action that night, and other times that didn't. It was the civil disobedience actions. Everybody knew there was going to be a, arresting, climbing the fence, and being arrested. And in and out action, there might be 2 or 3 people who were going to do it, and they wouldn't tell anybody. Or they might tell 2 people at the camp just in case they didn't come back. I mean, it was a very different way of doing anti-military work. All of the actions, I think, were meant to demonstrate to the base that their women were monitoring them, were watching them, were interacting with them, that we had power to change things, keep them off their guard. Just there was kind of like different levels of interaction between the base and the women's camp. Some legal, some, action things, and then there are these in and out actions, and so they were very disruptive to we were hoping, of course, to the mindset of the base, that they had control of the situation, and this is kind of saying they didn't have control. And so there were some pretty interesting in and out actions that I was involved in, and I can tell you one of them was I just never knew about these things. I was being a support person, going to pick somebody up after they were going to go around, and they had these signs outside posted no trespassing. They'd have a code 47432 dash 52 says this is a felony if you to trespass or to come near this fence or something like that. They just had this sign every, I don't know, 500 feet or something around the whole camp or whole base. And so this particular action, we were pasting up signs to go over that said, I don't even know what they said. They said, this space is being transformed to friendly space, or I don't know, whatever it was, or protected by the goddess, or I don't know. They had something they had said, and they put a code number on it, but they made the lettering look just like that, and the same amount of words and lines, but it just said something different. And they were going to go around and change a whole long line of fencing with these things. And so what they wanted was somebody to drop them off at one end of the fence that they were going to start with, and then pick them up at a certain time at a certain location, and whether they got through with their task or not, they're going to be at that location to be picked up and go back to the camp. It wasn't really an in-out action, but it kind of was. And so I said I would pick them up. And so I wasn't using my car. Mistake. Because they said, one of them was like, use my car, and this is the keys, and it was like a older car, truck or something. So at the designated time, I went over there with the car, had to like park. We all scoped this out in the daytime, so I knew what to do and everything. I parked, turned the car off, and because I was gonna, if they weren't there right away, I was gonna wait for them. It was kind of hidden place, and sure enough, you know, after about 10 minutes, they come and they're like, okay, we're here, let's go. I'm like, okay, the car won't start. And it's like, it's not just, I mean, it's like the battery is dead or something. It's like, you know, it just wouldn't start. We're like, you know, we're miles from the camp, and there's no cell phones in those days. And so, and these people have all the incriminating evidence on them, and they've just been doing it well. So what happens is, it was by a gate. So what happens is the military cars come out, or the military patrol comes by, and they see us. Because we're out there, like, you know, hood open, hammering on things at this point, and we're like caught. And then, so they're on the other side of the fence, and they go, "What's that going on over there?" You know, and we're like, "Our car won't start," you know, and they're like, "What's wrong?" You know, and we're like, "I don't know, maybe the alternator, maybe the battery," you know, and they're like, "Oh," you know, and they're like, "What do you need?" You know, and like, "I don't know, maybe a jump," you know, and they're like, "Oh, we can do that." So they come out of the fence, and they're giving us, like, they're under the hood and everything, and right there was one of those signs. I mean, it was like, we're parked here, and the sign is right there, and it's one of them that they transformed. And, you know, it's like, we're hoping this guy keeps his head in the trunk, in the hood, you know, not turn it over there or anything. You know, they didn't say, like, "What are you doing here?" They never asked. We were like, because none of us knew what we would have answered. Like, we're parked here in the middle of their gate and dressed funny. Anyway, so that was one of the things. They got us going, and we said, "Thanks a lot," and "No problem, bye, bye," and like, we went out of there, and always make sure the battery is charged. And that happened another time. I was picking somebody up. They were all in dark clothes, and they had like dirt streaks on their face, so they were disguised, and they were going to go in and do something. I can't remember what it was, and they were kind of young dykes. And they asked me if I would drop them off and pick them up, and I said okay. And they told me where I dropped them off. They said, "Just come back," and I don't even know what they were doing in there, but they were doing in-out action. They said, "Just come back after, you know, give us 45 minutes or an hour or something like that, and then come back." So I said, okay. So I did, and I came back, and they were like on the side of the road. I pulled over, they jumped in the car, pulled off to go back to the peace camp, and we didn't even get up to speed, and we got stopped by military police who pulled us over, and they're in the back seat, I'm in the front seat. And then comes on, rolled on my window, "Yes," you know, and then he's like, "Hey, what are you doing around here?" You know, and I'm like, "Driving, you know, just driving down the road," you know, and he's like, "Well, you know, what are you doing anything around here?" You know, and I'm like, "No, we're just driving around, we're trying," and he's like, "Well, we noticed that these two jumped in the car over there," and I go, "Yeah, they needed a ride. We're going over to camp, you know, we're going to go do something." And he, you know, he kept on trying to get us to say something, and they're like in the back shitting bricks. I don't know where, but he like pokes his head in and he goes, looks like you're kind of dirty or something like that. And I said, yeah, they're a mess, aren't they? Well, you know, is there any reason why you stopped me, you know? And just acted like, you know, you're bonkers for stopping me. I don't understand this whole thing. And he couldn't really pinpoint any reason why we did anything illegal. I just stopped and picked them up off the side of the road, and that wasn't illegal. And they were walking on the side of the road, and that wasn't illegal. And so once we established that, we kind of just said, okay, are you through? Like, is there a reason that we need to stay here and talk to you? We kind of want to go on. And he couldn't really do anything about it. And so, because we wouldn't admit to anything. And so, you know, those in-out actions were kind of scary sometimes that way. But
You mentioned being arrested in '83. Were you ever arrested on the base again?
I don't think I was arrested on the base again. I might have been in an action and got detained, but I never got, I mean, I had a BN bar letter at some point, but I didn't ever have anything more serious happen to me, though I may have gotten, you know, in there and they got me, and but just let me go, you know, stroke of luck kind of thing.
Do you remember, or do you have any recollection of women who planned to do an in and out action and didn't make it back out and got arrested?
It seems like that happened once or twice, but I don't think I got too involved in it. Again, a lot of times those things happened when I wasn't there, and because I was back and forth a lot. If it happened while I was there, I just didn't get involved with it because I was probably going to be leaving the next day, and it wasn't my thing I didn't need to be involved. So I'm sure it happened, but I can't really give you stories about that.
So with the ban and bar letter, they would say, if you come back into this establishment again, you know, don't come back in. So when you set out to do some of the in and out actions that you did, and was that something you processed and you were willing to accept the consequences of?
You know, I never looked at the ban and bar letter as anything that was, I always looked at that ban and bar letter like if I did another civil disobedience action, that's when it would be curtains or something. With the in and out actions, I don't think I was ever worried that I would not come out. The in and out actions I did were, certainly I could have been arrested in there, but my mindset was just so much that it wasn't going to happen that way, that I guess I would have said, yeah, I'll take the consequences, but I wasn't really looking at it as the same kind of consequences as it would happen if I got arrested doing a civil disobedience action. It would probably either be a lot worse, or they would just, you know, show me to the gate and kick me out or something like that, or rough me up, or I don't know what I thought they would do, but it didn't seem to, I didn't match it with the ban and bar letter.
And when you say in and out, how did you get in and how did you get out?
So most of the time it was by climbing a fence. Sometimes it was by cutting the fence. And that was definitely easier to get in if you cut the fence than if you had to climb the fence, because the fence had barbed wire on it, and that was always a little bit of a tricky maneuver getting over that. But we cut the fence, and that was a definite arrestable action, and it was also a lot more serious than doing civil disobedience. You know, whether you had a ban and bar letter or not, if you cut the fence, you're in trouble.
How did you cut the fence?
With big bolt cutters that showed up at the peace camp on a regular basis. A lot of times people who went to cut the fence had to ditch the bolt cutters and throw them someplace, and they were never found again. And so we, you know, had to go find some more bolt cutters. And so it was just one of those donated items a lot of times. And if there were bolt cutters on the property, they were kind of open to anybody using them, I guess. the size of them were like tree pruner size, kind of, and sturdiness that's what they look like. They look like big, long, strong hedge clippers, but the where you would clip on the hedge, it was a small hooked piece, and that's what you would wrap around the fence and clip. They were very strong blades, and so you could clip through steel, basically, is what the whole point is. And then carrying them was, you wouldn't want to carry them onto the base with you. They'd kind of hamper you because they're kind of big size, long, and they're heavy. Not extremely heavy, but they're pretty strong material, so they're weighted. And mostly, I think people, when they use them, if they were going into the base, cutting the fence and going into the base, they would put the bolt clippers in a nearby location to be picked up on the way back to the camp. We often, there was a kind of a taboo about cutting the fence directly behind the camp, the part that was attached to the camp, because we wanted to pretend that, you know, maybe it wasn't us that was cutting the fence or something. It wasn't incriminating because it wasn't the fence that was adjacent directly to the peace camp. But I don't think that there are many other people that were running around cutting the fence like the Amish farm fence or the trailer camp fence or other fence areas, the Q zone fence, things like that. So it was kind of a funny restriction that you couldn't just go directly back and cut the fence. But I guess maybe also, you know, that area right behind us was patrolled more, and it was lit up more, and there were different things around that particular area of the fence that we just said it's better not to do it there.
Were you ever a part of fence cutting that was an action in and of itself, that you weren't planning to go into the base but were simply cutting the fence?
I think so. You know, that's kind of like asking me about specific firewalks. I did a bunch of them, and after a while they all kind of, like that first one was really important because it got over that fear of the roof, but the fence cutting thing was just kind of like one of those activities that you kind of went along with, some people who wanted to do it or not, and it was just as, you know, dangerous as an in-out action. It needed to be planned out. It wasn't a casual thing, but I was on board either as support or doing that several times. And, you know, sometimes I just didn't want to do that. So.
Did you make choices to do actions based on relationships you had with people in terms of trust or knowledge of them, or were you fairly open about who you did things with or didn't do things with? I had to be trusting the people I was with. I think I did an action, I was a civil disobedience that first year, and we had an affinity group, and even with that affinity group, some of the members wanted to do something different from the affinity group, and they then we had to process it before we did our action and everything like that. They wanted to go over differently than what we had planned, and having had that experience, I was like, you know, I'm into processing any time, but the thing is, I don't want to process right at the action time. I don't want to process as we're being arrested. I want some of those things. If we don't know what, we didn't foresee this happening, we didn't have a plan, I want to be able to trust the people I'm with, that we're all looking out after each other, not just going to go off, you know. And so I was very clear about that, and I didn't do actions unless I felt, well, sometimes I would do support actions, like when I picked up those dikes and I really wasn't sure what they were doing, and it got to be a little bit of a weird thing. And the car. It seemed like if I didn't do that, I would end up having a little bit of a problem. And so I was pretty clear, having some of those not so great experiences, to trust the people I was with. And I saw that not everybody had that
same kind of way of going into it, doing in-out action, but I just didn't want to be, I wasn't into being thrown into jail and left for, years or something. And I was very much into stopping the military, to screwing them up as much as I could.
Did you have a nonviolent philosophy that you thought about what was violence and what was nonviolence in terms of property damage or spray painting or civil disobedience or?
I never thought property damage was violence, especially if it was military property. I've never looked at civil disobedience as violence. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. I call myself nonviolent, but I also recently, even, very recently, have figured out that even the violence that's on the street, drug dealing or domestic violence in the home, stuff like that, yes, that's violent and everything, but really what's causing that violence is institutionalized violence. The institutions, the legal system that allows men to kill women, or rape women and get away with it a lot, whereas women are hiding in fear of their husbands under an assumed name and they can't get police protection or something like that. It's institutionalized violence that creates the violence on the street. And so addressing institutionalized violence is more of where I put my energy, and how to bring those structures down, or not necessarily even down, but changing the way that they're done so that they aren't violent. They aren't racist, they aren't sexist, they aren't, all those isms, but also that they aren't perpetuating or creating the violence on the street. And so anything I do to bring that structure into a different kind of structure, I think is nonviolent. So if it means going in and pouring sand in a gas tank of a vehicle that's a military vehicle, I don't have any problem with that. Whether there's self-defense and therefore it's nonviolent, if it's offensive, then it is violence. All of that seems to me a little bit like talking about the people on the street doing violence to each other, when up here they're pulling the strings.
Were there actions that other people did at the camp, other women did, or things that happened in that realm that you weren't comfortable with?
Oh, I'm sure there was. Probably every day. I'm trying to think of something specific, and I'm not coming up with something specific, but often it was something that would make me uncomfortable, and then I would listen to everybody's reasons why they were doing that. Or they weren't explaining their reasons, They were just doing it and saying everybody else was oppressing them if they couldn't do it. And, it could be something really weird that seemed that it wasn't oppressive to not do it. It was like, kind of maybe destructive if you did it. I can't even think of something, but maybe it would be like painting a barn or painting words on a barn that were inflammatory or something like that. I can't think of anything specific, but usually what I would do is I would go back and I would ponder this for a long time, and sometimes that would be an afternoon, sometimes that would be 3 weeks, but I wouldn't get into the fray of the argument, because often I felt I don't know enough. I didn't know anything about patriarchy. I didn't know anything about lesbians. I didn't know anything about nonviolence. I wasn't articulate. I could build footers. I knew I did not like the military and I had a big rage against them, and I could practice that. I was eternally grateful for that. And all of the arguments, or the witches not doing work, was one thing I can remember now. They were out there smoking pot in the woods, and then they'd come in and eat food, and they weren't building the outhouse or filing some papers or making flyers or something. Cooking food. They were just eating the food and then going out and having a great time, and then and sleeping till 12. And if you address that, they would say they were doing work because they stayed up very late at night and called the spirits in on their circles, and they were keeping the camp protected with labrises. And I'd sit there and I was one of the people that was laying pipe down to the campgrounds and doing and needed, help digging some areas out or whatever. And I was very intimidated by all those witches because they were like, and I was, being in a relationship kind of with TC, who was one of those people. And, I'd have to say, what do you call that? And she'd go, it's a labris. Can you try to remember that? Labris, I go, yeah, okay. How do you spell it? And she'd always say, oh, you're such a baby dyke, And it's like, I'm sorry, I am, because I don't know how else to get the information, And so I'd always kind of just leave the argument, people would argue about it, but I would listen to both sides, and then after a while I would understand the side that I really didn't understand at first, and I'd get it, and I'd change my thinking actually a lot. But by that time the argument was way over. It was a done deal. The date is now November 14th. Okay, well anyway, what I wanted to say was there were those two women journalists who came and participated in Firewalk, and they were participating and doing everything, but then they wrote an article, and they published this article. I don't know all the places, but one of the places that they published this article was upstate New York in the town paper up there. It was front page news with a color print of me walking across the coals. Not that the paper up there knew me, they just chose that particular newspaper or those articles, and then they had pictures of me inside, following that story, and they quoted me in lots of different places where I'd been talking to them on the side. And in that article I was talking about firewalking, I was talking about feminist spirituality, and I was talking about being a lesbian and being out. And I was not out to those people up there. I wasn't, they didn't know anything about feminist spirituality. And so when I went back up there, it was like a Sunday night, and then we went to a place to have breakfast, and some of the people that we were working with had gotten a newspaper, and we were having breakfast with them, and they showed me the newspaper. And reading the newspaper, it was just one of those things where everybody all of a sudden knew I was a lesbian, a witch, and in the place I was going to, I was doing these witch things, and I was being a lesbian, and I had not said anything about that to any of the people up there. So they were like, so Woody, you seem to be going down there a lot, and I thought this was a peace camp, and all these things. And the article had nothing, very little about the nonviolent anti-military action, because it was mostly centered around witches in Seneca County. It was kind of a scare article. So I had to explain myself to the people that I worked with and everything. And it was, they all loved and trusted me and everything, but it was just a little bit weird. And also, because there were other women from that area that had gone down there the year before, I think it was, they were like, no, it really is a peace camp and stuff like that. But people asked me a lot of uncomfortable questions, and like I said, at that time I was still just coming out. I really wasn't, feminist spirituality was kind of a new thing to me, and it was just one aspect of, I just wanted to record that because being involved with the peace camp wasn't always easy on the outside, you know, to tell people. Like after I went to the peace camp, I cut my hair, I changed my name, I came out as a lesbian, and then I went home to Cleveland, and I was like, you have to call me Woody Blue now. And they're like, no, we can still call you Patty, you're your family. And it's like, no, you can't. And you know, it just made life a little difficult sometimes on the outside, trying to explain that or not explain it, because I didn't think people would really understand. And most of my family, well, all of my family didn't know what I was doing. They just knew I was up in New York and I was living in a tent, and every time I came back to Cleveland there was a little more that they had to not understand and kind of deal with. And I insisted, you know, they call me Woody Blue. I insisted. I didn't tell them I was a lesbian. My mom thought, she interpreted everything as I was living with a group of nuns. And I didn't know that she thought that until later on. Something came out and she was saying that, and I was like, a group of nuns? How did she transpose whatever I was saying to that? But that's where she went with it. And so anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up.
So I have a question then. When the two women came to the camp and spent time there, you were aware they were writing an article?
I don't know if they posed that they were writing an article. They were kind of did say that they were involved with some project, maybe with school. I can't remember. I know that a lot of people at the camp were a little upset about the articles that came out. It wasn't like they were totally above board, I don't think, but they might have been indicating that they were doing something, but nobody was picking that up. And certainly they had to take pictures by the fire walk, and I don't think anyone would have said, yeah, go ahead and print those pictures in a newspaper, because the picture in the front page in where I was me walking across the coals, and it was tied, you know, my name was under there and everything, and you know, they used to burn witches, so, you know, coming out and up in a rural area, Woody Blue, you know, was walking across the coal, feminist witch, you know, or something like that, walking across the coals was not a very wise idea for those people to print that stuff. They, you know, they were like another two cool lesbians that came to the camp that were doing some documentation, but I don't think that anyone realized that there was going to be this kind of article. I certainly wasn't apologetic about being a lesbian or a witch or a feminist, whatever it was in the article. It was an accurate article, but any article about feminist witches, lesbians doing firewalking, any place would be kind of inflammatory. And yeah, it was the truth about the peace camp. It wasn't really like it was wrong, but we already were having problems staying cool with the townspeople and all that stuff, and I think that kind of just made the situation kind of inflamed, and we had to do a lot of explaining.
You said that there were things when you took that job that you didn't know how to do, but they just needed to get done. So I would like to know how you did things if you didn't know how to do them.
Yes. Okay, so let me just overall generally say that because the camp didn't close, all the things that had been temporary had to be more permanent. That was outhouses, that was getting water. I mean, they had brought in water tanks to supply the campers. They had built underground pits for food storage the first summer. They had porta-johns and stuff like that. So this was converting a old farm into a more permanent place where people could come, camp, have outdoor facilities that were set up with wells and pumps and outhouses. showers, places, an outdoor kitchen that was usable, that we didn't have to keep using the facilities in the house. The house, and because there were a lot of people coming, these had to be enough facilities for everybody. And the house was not to be a place for sleeping and eating. The house was supposed to be for like office work and healing rooms and things like that. So the house was a structure that was not really supposed to be for kitchen and sleeping, though some people did do those things who worked in the office all the time. It was just easier for them to make a cup of tea or heat up some food on the stove. Sometimes that got a little bit, people felt like there should be more people from the office working outside doing the kitchen stuff. But generally what I was supposed to be doing was keeping things, making things more permanent, and then throughout the summer when things were needed outside, it was all just everything, outside stuff to inside stuff, and I didn't know how to do a lot of that stuff. And Merry Christmas was the other logistical person. She did know how to do it, or if she didn't know how to do a lot of stuff, she could fake it a lot better than I could fake it. But and she had extensive knowledge. She was just very good with fixing things and figuring out how to make structures. I was still an apprentice carpenter, and so I knew how to put two things together. I knew how to make things perpendicular, but I didn't know, like, sometimes how far studs had to be placed in order to make it sturdy and stuff like that. And she knew all that stuff. So that was good. And for building the outhouses and for that, we worked together on that. Things that were tricky were the water, getting the water back down to the campgrounds, because we had to bring piping from a well down to the campground, and there was a storage tank in the middle of that line that we would use to fill up, and then the storage tank water was piped down. And we also had to have it in code with the public health department so that the water wasn't contaminated sitting in the storage tank. And the pump house had to be there too. All of these things, I never had to deal with any of that stuff before. And Merry Christmas had some of the knowledge. And then Jody came, and they seemed like to know things, and but then when they weren't around, it was me that had to figure it out. I remember, for instance, one time the pump broke, and they couldn't get the pump working, and Merry Christmas was gone, Jody was gone, and I needed to get the pump working, and I ended up going to Interlaken, was that the town? Mm-hmm. That was where there was a hardware store that had pumps, and I went there and asked them, what do I do to fix this, basically? And they said, well, you take the pump apart, and in there is probably a bladder or a seal that is maybe broken or whatever, and that's what you'd have to replace. And if you need to replace that, then you have to call us, and we either have it on stock or we order it for you. And then, but if that isn't it, then, they just kind of walk through most likely things that weren't working. And, it could be in the piping, it could be in the valve. So I had to just go back and figure it out. And it was very frustrating because, these things, everybody was on a tight budget. If I broke the pump when taking it apart, that would be an extremely expensive item to replace. I've never been a good plumber, and so taking apart plumbing and then putting it back together, whether that meant soldering or replacing seals, I wasn't very good at that in my own house with the faucet. So fixing it, and then all this was PVC piping down to the camp grounds, and I just wasn't comfortable with those things. And so to do it, I would rather have Merry Christmas be doing it and me helping her, giving her the glue, giving her the little saw, running up to the house to get things, rather than being the person to make these saw cuts and then trying to put the pipe together. The PVC piping to the back got cut occasionally by people who were doing some vandalism on our land, and so that had to be replaced, you know, a few times. Getting the sinks set up in the campground was something, again, it's like, okay, so what kind of sinks do we need? And we need a shower thing, and how do we get the pressure to go up? All of these were plumbing problems that I had to figure out, and it was just difficult.
So why not hire someone that knew how to do these things to come in and do it?
One of the things was that we only wanted women doing things. We were in a rural location, so it wasn't like we were in a city with a lot of people to pick from. The women that we knew to do those things were like Jody or Merry Christmas. They were local women. Jody and Shad lived on their own land in that area. Merry Christmas lived in Geneva, so these were the people that were local. They had other things to do, that's why they weren't there all the time. Merry Christmas lived on the bus, and the first year there, which was helpful to me because taking my tent down from upstate New York and coming down all the time and setting it up was kind of a chore. And Merry Christmas just said, we're taking the bus and we're going to be living on there. Merry Christmas was a little bit bossy sometimes and didn't do everything consensus-wise, but she definitely understood that kind of stuff and just didn't want an argument with people about, oh, we should all be living on the bus or something like that. It was like, we need to have that space, we need to have places to lay things out, we need a place for our tools that's not everybody's common tools so they don't get taken. And I was not feeling like I had the power to do that, but Merry Christmas didn't have a problem with that, just saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing. And we had always a long list, clipboard full of projects that we were trying to get done, clearing areas, as well as doing these structures and this piping, and we had to fix things in the house sometimes, and we had to build a place for the wood to be stored. We had some temporary structures because, again, it was the first summer we were just using firewood. Those structures were kind of shabby, they weren't very strong, so we had to build those so that the wood would be protected. We had to, we weren't using the pits to store the vegetables anymore. I can't remember what we did for that. But storage places for food. The kitchen pad had to be poured, so we had a place that was not just a campfire to cook with, shelving for chopping boards and stuff like that. All of that had to be figured out, set up, and then done. And so those were my nightmares. Welcome to my nightmare kind of place.
And did other women help you other than Jody and Mary, and how did they come to help you?
Yes. We couldn't have done it we couldn't have done all that by ourselves. This is the way it kind of went sometimes. We'd say, okay, we're going to have to run a pipe from the water storage place to where the showers are going to be set up, all the way at the end of the campgrounds. And it's going to be having to do a little 6-inch or 12-inch tunnel from that middle where the well was all the way out to that place, and it has to be so deep in the ground, and it's hard ground. It's not easy ground to break up and make this little trench. So, okay, so anyway, there'd be on a weekend, a bunch of women coming from, like an affinity group coming from Rochester or from Niagara Falls or West Virginia or something, never been to the camp before, and 7 women in a group coming, and they'd say, they would do trainings like nonviolence trainings and things like that, but they were like, we had some kind of work exchange thing going, so that people coming on the land would do some work for getting set up with food and staying there. And so they'd say, well, what kind of work should we do? Everybody always wanted to wash dishes because that was easiest, But I'd say, I need to have this trench made down to the campgrounds. Do you think that you could do that? We have shovels, and they're like, oh yeah, we work in offices, we never get a chance to do that stuff. I'd say, well, it'll be like I don't know how long, but if you only have a 3-hour work shift or something like that, you don't have to do the whole thing there, but this is what we need. And they would take on that project, and by the middle of the morning, that whole trench would have been dug down there, and be like, oh, that was easy, But again, I had weekends were the most productive for all this kind of work being done, because that's when people would come a lot. And that's when I would go around with a clipboard and have a crew here, have a crew clearing out some wooded area, have a crew stacking firewood. Merry Christmas and I would just scope out these things and try to get all this kind of work done, so we weren't doing it. And then we got this reputation for being clipboard ladies. Like, we would go around and boss everyone around, and we wouldn't do any of the work, and so it was like, well, we were doing a ton of work, it wasn't like we weren't doing any work, but that helped us so much to move forward on these projects, get all this stuff done, and then we could get there and try to set it up for the next inexperienced, unskilled crew to move it on a little bit. Yes, women came and helped us. Sometimes when we had things that we just needed help on, women from the office would come and do help with, holding boards so we could hammer things. Or the boardwalk was built the first year, and we kept on wanting to expand that boardwalk into the women and children's area and more into the campground, so that people with disabilities and small children are carrying things back to those campgrounds, so it would have a little more easy time of it. But we never did that.
Tell us a little bit about resources and how you guys came by tools or supplies or money to be able to get tools and supplies.
Merry Christmas and Jody had their own tools, and they had an extensive tool chest, which they did not want people borrowing their tools, because it would they needed their tools for their other work also, and so they would transport tools back and forth from Northwoods or Geneva if they knew they needed special tools. And then we had tools at the camp that was we later made a tool shed, but at first they were just all in the garage or the barn, and it was anyone could use those tools anytime, and there was like screws, and everything was kind of not organized well. I tried to organize them several times, but people would take tools and not bring them back. They'd get lost, they'd get whatever. Sometimes people donated tools. We had to replace things a lot of times out of our own pockets and stuff like that. And that was, and whenever we asked for money for that stuff, it was like, well, we need money for flyers and we need money for this and that. And so money was always, like I said, I was supposed to get a $25 stipend, and got that once, and people needed money for gas to go up to Rochester and Syracuse on different peace camp business, and money was just really tight. Tools were a problem. we finally got a tool shed together so that, we could see the tools and they had places, and then people were better about bringing them back and putting them in the right place. We tried to put signs on the thing, if you use the tools, bring them back, da 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 da. But yeah, it was just kind of a haphazard thing that first year, and it wasn't great. But, it was what it was. We had a lot of paint, for instance, and paintbrushes, because we made banners and we made painting, actions and things like that. So we had a ton of paint, and people donated paint and paintbrushes, and that was never a problem. You could always find paint, but you could never find, the right screwdriver or wrench. Wrenches were a problem.
So tell us a little bit, if you had a project and you knew you were going to build something and you needed so many 2x4s and so many this and that, how would you make that happen logistically?
Merry Christmas and Jody did more of that stuff, because I didn't know how many boards we would need to build an outhouse and stuff like that. They would do the diagram, and they would count the studs and count the boards, and then they had more authority in the regional meetings or any meetings than I had. Probably that was because I kept on saying, I can't do it, and they were always going well, we can do it, but this is what it's going to entail, and so they kind of took care of those kinds of logistics, and I would have felt out of my scope to say, well, I'm going to go to this lumber yard and get all this lumber. I didn't have a truck. They had trucks to haul things. I didn't. I had a car, and so all that stuff was pretty much, they did that, and I just worked with them and did the best I could. But I learned a lot, in doing these things. I had to go to the public health department and find out how to do the water stuff and how to test the water and make sure it was good, drinking water and stuff like that. And the public health department was impressed with us. They saw that we were doing the correct things. They'd come out for an inspection once in a while, and when they came out, someone would call me and say, so and so is here from the public health department to have an inspection, and so I'd come up because I knew where everything was and everything, and they were fine. If they had any suggestions, I just said, okay, that's a good suggestion. We can do that. We can put that into place, and so they were always happy. It was good. It was really good. Good public relations. There were other clipboard ladies besides the logistics people. Like Andrea was definitely a clipboard lady. And there were people that walked around with clipboards a lot and would tell people, they'd be making lists, they would be doing things. I don't know if you got this on any other interviews, but there was a web of people, and there were 13 web coordinators, and so they were in charge of their projects, like publicity and office and healing, and so logistics was one of those. And so all of these people had clipboards and were organizing large factions of their expertise, and so they did have to have lists, and they had to have people helping them and stuff like that. So there was the logistics coordinators were generally called the clipboard ladies, and of course we heard those comments, and it was kind of a joke and not joke sometimes, I think, depending on who was talking and how it was used. But I didn't have any apologetic feelings about walking around with the clipboard. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I had to get done, and I could not have a clipboard, but it would make me very inefficient, so I didn't have a problem with that. And when you're working with a bunch of women that are just working at the peace camp doing their work shift, and they're saying, we need this, we need that, I said, okay, well, let me write it down, and I'll go up to the house and have somebody bring it down to you. That wasn't really something to say we shouldn't have a clipboard. That was helpful. So there was comments, but it was like, so what?
So, Woody, can you give us a little bit of picture? It sounds like there were a number of webs, so there was competition to some extent to get people to do the work. I mean, and so how did that happen?
I don't really remember having a problem with that. I think in the evenings we sat around at dinner time and made a list of jobs that we were going to have to do in the next day or two and where we were with them. And then we asked people to sign up for certain things, like making dinner, for instance, was something that had to be done every day. And it was a big job because depending on the number of people there, it could have been finding enough food, which would be shopping or something, which really wasn't done by somebody who had just gotten there because they wouldn't know how to do that. But generally, business like that got taken care of the night before, so we all had an idea of what the next day would be like and what jobs we would be working on. And sometimes that changed because something came up and we would do different things, but it was pretty organized. I mean, we figured out how to do those things. I didn't feel like I was competing with people for workers or anything like that. I put out the work that we were doing was outside work a lot, and it was like digging or piling or clearing things. So it was kind of just outside physical work, and lots of women wanted to do that, and lots of other women didn't want to do that. And so it just was what they gravitated to. And so, yeah, that was kind of the way that worked. I really felt that there was a lot of cooperation between everybody. I never felt like people were, feeling a scarcity of workers or something. Maybe that did happen, but I never felt that. I just felt, well, if there wasn't enough people to do this project, then that project wasn't going to get done, or I'd figure out another way to do it. That's all. Because I went and was working up in the upstate New York, I always could go up there and talk to people about it too and ask them about those things. At the camp, Jody and Merry Christmas were the people that had more knowledge than me. If an electrician came up, it was like, okay, I wouldn't just say, oh, well, would you mind rewiring the barn, while you're here as your work shift or something, because even if the barn needed to be rewired and I knew that, Jody and Merry Christmas would want to make sure it was done certain ways, and but I might say, Merry Christmas is coming down here on the weekend or in a day or two. Could you look at the barn? And we were trying to get some lights up on the second floor. Some things I just knew I wasn't going to be doing them, but I could kind of tap into other people's expertise. Like anything, it was like, we need to get, the pump fixed. And it was like, and they're all looking at me. And so it's kind of, or we need to get the Women's Herstory Museum built. And I can't remember why Merry Christmas. Jody wasn't there a lot sometimes. But it just was like, I had to do it, and I could figure that one out. That was okay with me. But certain things like that, I just said, well, how would I do it if it was, I have to do it. And so I just would figure it out. And if I was wrong, what could I say? Sorry, they weren't doing it. So it was up to me. But I had that understanding before I came to the camp. I had a sign on my mirror in my house in Cleveland, my medicine chest mirror. I had a sign that said, I can do anything. And I wrote it in lipstick so it wouldn't wash off. And after a couple of years, I put in parentheses underneath that, except plumbing, because I couldn't do plumbing. But I had the belief and the understanding that I could do anything. And the camp reinforced that in many different ways. Like I was saying yesterday, the woman's spirituality and becoming invisible and walking on fire, that was like defying the laws of physics. But I was like, well, you can do that though, you know? So like I said, when Lindsay came, she upped that understanding for me. And I think that, I mean, I don't know that, but when I talk to you and you tell me some of these things like that workshop, and I think other women got that message from me who came to the camp and saw me working. They thought I knew everything, but I didn't know very much of what I was doing a lot of times. I was figuring it out. And I think that women felt, we can do it. I mean, I just kind of spouted that theory all the time anyway, like, we have to do it, so it has to be done, and we can do it. I don't know exactly how right now, you know, and, or we don't have the money to buy this kind of thing that would make it easy, like a tool, for instance. But we can make a tool, you know, and it would just... What amazed me over and over again was when we were out there working on something and we didn't have something to work with. It was like, well, just because we don't have that thing that we always used before in our lives to do it, doesn't mean that we can't get it done. And so we would just come up with creative ways of figuring it out. I think at the shower area we used doorknobs or something for hooks for hanging things on. Is that true? Because I think we found a box of doorknobs in the barn at one point and we didn't have hooks. And we were trying to figure out, you know, we needed when women took showers, have things for towels and stuff like that. And so we're like, oh, the doorknobs, you know. I mean, I don't even know if that was my idea or somebody else's idea, but it was like, well, we can use doorknobs, you know, and it was like, oh, that's a great idea, because people use doorknobs to hang things on all the time. So that's how that evolved. It wasn't like somebody planned that out. And so we could always come up with a thing to do if we didn't have the things that we were supposed to have. And or, you know, going to town to get some hooks was like, that was too easy. And actually, you know, we wouldn't want to spend the money on that stuff, so we would scrounge. And you know, we had a lot of stuff at that camp because people came and they left stuff all the time. You know, every week when a herd of women would come, they would be working and everything. They would see that we would need things. They would leave tools. They would leave a box of nails. They would go out and buy something because they would get frustrated that we didn't have something and they were trying to do something and we were jerry-rigging it and stuff like that. And they'd go out and buy brackets or something like that. And so then we'd have a whole stack of brackets and they didn't fit anything else, you know, except for what we had been working on. But sooner or later they'd come up, you know, for in and out action or something, or putting a banner together or whatever, you know. And so it was the creativity of the women there too, you know. They would come in and we would say what we were trying to do and we'd get frustrated and there'd be some woman who would come up with an idea, go, okay, let's give it a try. And I'm sure that, I mean, logistics, I can tell you that happened a lot. I'm sure it happened in all the webs, that people came up with ideas of how to do something. It was always an evolutionary project. I mean, that was at the camp when people came, they had certain needs. Like Lindsay, when she came, she needed a plot of land to grow her grass and her food. So it was like, okay, and you know, then we made an orchard, you know, because things were donated. It wasn't because we decided we wanted to be the Peace Camp Orchard. It was because people had trees that they gave us. And it was like, all of a sudden, then we have to figure out how to plant an orchard. And I don't think any of us there had ever planted an orchard before. But Apple Brenda worked in orchards, and so she could guide us, on that. And so it was like, okay, now we need a crew of women to dig holes and plant these trees. And, all of that just evolved.
What was your sense of women's willingness to share what they knew, resources they had, or their physical labor?
I don't think I've ever been in a place where people were so willing to figure it out together and work together. I'm sure that there are people that held back on stuff, whatever, and it might have been because of shyness or not enough self-confidence that they really understood it and stuff like that. But people were very willing to lend their time, energy, money, labor. There was a lot of people that didn't have money, and that was, Cindy Sangre said it best one time. It was the only place that she ever knew on earth that people could walk in the front door, never having been there before, and go in the refrigerator and make themselves some food, and eat, and not have anyone question it at all. Even ask them anything except for, hi, I'm so-and-so, what's your name, but everyone was free to have access to any of this stuff. And, except for a few places like Merry Christmas and Jody did not want their tools to be used unless they were using them. Some personal items like that. But people were very, like I said, they were inventive, they were creative, and if they had an area of expertise and they could see that there might be a need for that, like an electrician or a person who knew filing cabinets, or there are so many different places. Songs, people came in specialty or rituals, you don't go and advertise for those things. People just came to the camp, and then they would just do their the thing that they knew best and share that information or share stories and stuff like that, so we all could grow. People donated books, music, all kinds of stuff. We didn't have electricity to the back area, so anyone wanting any kind of electrical thing down there had to use batteries, and I think we talked about putting electricity back there, but it never really worked.
Was there any perk to being a logistical person? I've heard people speak about grunts, or maybe it was butch, or did you have a sense that that was something that women were slightly in awe of? Or?
Personally, at the time, no. I wasn't really aware of all that because, again, I was in and out a lot. I wasn't really, and I always felt a little bit under the supervision of Jody and Merry Christmas. When you talk about it, I do remember some of those terms, but I never took them on as terms that were disparaging or flattering. I just felt that they were saying something about it, and I agreed. It was grunt work a lot of times, and it was kind of heavy physical stuff. At the same time, again, I was learning about lesbianism and butch and femme and stuff like that, and I didn't put myself in any of those categories. I just wasn't at that time there. And I stayed away from the house a lot because those women were intimidating to me. All the office workers seemed to be more academic kinds of people who had gone to college, had degrees, and were very articulate about peace camp politics. And I wasn't. And so they would be dealing with the townspeople or publicity or events, projects, filing. They seemed to have that. Meetings. I did not like to go to meetings because I just felt a little bit like I didn't know what anyone was talking about, and I don't want them to ask my opinion because I don't really know what my opinion is around that stuff. If I went to a meeting, it was as a logistics coordinator who was needing to explain where we were on certain projects or something like that, so that people would have a kind of timetable for planning an event or something. And the way we were perceived I don't know how we were perceived. Like I said, I kind of stayed away from all the academic people, and I think they would be the ones that would be going, oh, big, strong butches, but I didn't feel like a big, strong butch or anything. And the people that were out there were big, strong butches, so they weren't like, walking around in awe of me. And it was more for me, like when we had something, it was a little bit of a challenge to do, to have people there and really, like if we had to move a big log or something, like, okay, let's all heave ho kind of thing. And that was kind of fun because we would, do it to music or something to do with, the way women are. We would just figure out how to do it, and we'd have fun sometimes out there doing that stuff. And so, like if we were stacking wood, at first it was really grunt, boring work, but then we'd get a few more people out there and we'd be doing different things and like doing a dance step or something. I don't know, it was just fun after a while. So, I don't know. That was just the way it was.
And was that something that you brought back to the work you were doing upstate?
No. Upstate, I was working with men mostly, and they were alternative kind of guys and everything, but there was just banter, and they did most of the talking, and they would tell stories, and they kind of would take over the airwaves, and I just was working as their apprentice, doing the things, bringing the wood over and hammering and fixing stuff, piling wood and stuff like that. But the women up there too were straight, and so when I hang out with them, I wasn't hanging out with the and they did work, some hauling stuff and whatever. There was a couple that had a dairy, and so they did a lot of work with cows and manure. And they had a yogurt factory, so it was a lot of heavy work that they were doing, but they weren't necessarily big, strong butches. They were more like rural women that looked pretty dykey because they wore these big boots all the time. But I talked with the women sometimes about the peace camp and how because they were curious about all women doing the work and fascinated with that idea too, and occasionally some of them would come down, but like I said, I didn't come out to them. The newspaper article explained that, and then after that it was like they were like, oh, well, that's why she likes to go down there, or something like that. But a couple years ago I went back up to the North Country, and I had, for that reunion, at that time I went up there and I did an art show up there and stuff like that, and stayed with some of the people that I was involved with, and two of them had come out as lesbian. One of them, the dairy farm woman, who I actually had a crush on, and had come down in '83, and I have to say this, in '83 when she came down, and I had a total crush on her. I just thought, her name was Valerie, and I just thought that she was everything. But I was totally intimidated by her, and so she was part of the affinity group. And one day we were I was walking up this way from the campground. She was walking down the boardwalk, and so we met on the boardwalk, and she just kind of grabbed me, and she said, I just think you're a great person. And then she kissed me on the lips and then continued walking. And I was like, because like I said, I just figured out I was a lesbian, but I hadn't done anything. And it was like, and she was hooked up with a guy up there in, the North Country. And she was tenting with this woman she was really good friends with, Rebecca, which I found out later. They slept together sexually and stuff, and they would take little trips together and sleep together, but I didn't know that at the time. And anyway, she just like kind of knocked me off my feet. But again, like, she understood kind of the lesbian thing and didn't have any problem with that stuff. But other women were curious about it and they'd ask me, but I was kind of tentative about answering them because I just didn't know enough myself and I didn't know how to answer their questions well. I wasn't strong enough myself. So I didn't really bring stuff back up there. But I enjoyed that life a lot. I liked living in my tent and everything, doing the work up there. So I think, when I went up there a couple years ago, 2 of them had come out as lesbian. One of them was openly living with a girlfriend, and Valerie. She was hooked up with a woman and had actually gotten married or something. And they built a house together. And then this other woman asked me to come over and visit her, who had lived down the road. Down the road up there went like 5 miles. It wasn't a walk. And so I went over to visit her. She was like, I want to show you this. And she was really into horses and everything. And so she wanted to show me something. And she was like this kind of, all of the women were pretty sturdy. They would have been, butches or the logistical one we were talking about. And when I went over there, she had been having a love affair with a woman for the last couple of years, and it wasn't a very good situation that she was in. The woman was kind of using her, and it wasn't good, but she was asking me questions about this stuff, but she had not come out to anyone. None of the other women who were good friends. I mean, they'd been up there for 20 years, sharing barns and helping each other with their work and everything, but she was not out to any of them, and she wanted to talk to me about that stuff, and she actually came down to Florida and visited me down there, and I took her to a little women's festival in Gulfport, and she was just like, it was the world opening up for her, but she was afraid to come out in the rural area, and she had male friends, and she said everything will be, she had kids that she wasn't out with at that time. She came out to them afterwards, but anyway, so that's the area up there. There are a lot of alternative people, but it was still very scary for her to come out. And nobody else was saying that stuff. Everybody says they're supportive of lesbians or gays and whatever, but it wasn't. Rural America is still very homophobic and Christian, and your business can be ruined. You can lose friends. So no, I did not bring my lesbian skills up to that area.